Sonic X Comic Issue 22. Oh look, a story that will pretend to have the guts to shake up the status quo, but will probably only do it for one issue, because the comic went episodic earlier, and if it was too lazy to show us how the Leprechaun mecha got destroyed, after the characters pointed out that it got away, then maybe it already gave up on continuity, even though it's a comic book. Eggman's not gonna give up his main robot sidekicks, and if he does, it won't be forever. Why bother having a story with a plot like that when it's only gonna last for one issue? That's like giving us a taste of what could be and then barely using the idea. They could have one different job than normal, but it'd be much more interesting to have them have like more than one, or stay in one job for a decent amount of time. This is the kind of thing that in a comic book would last an arc. Negative continuity is the quickest way to get me detached and cynical. It adds nothing but a punishment for reading the previous issues. I hope the rest of the comic won't be like that. There's value in being episodic, but not when you use a significant idea and barely use it at all. At that point, it's just restrained. We start out with text saying that Eggman's attacking Area 99, and Westwood and Sonic are being threatened by a giant mecha. However, Eggman was stupid enough to put Boko and Deco in charge of a control panel with a gigantic amount of buttons and not reprogram them to know what all those buttons do, or better yet, control the control panel himself, which he always does. Deco and Boko have barely gotten to do anything in this comic, so them even being in this situation is very out of character. It's very obvious what the predictable humor is going to be, especially since I've seen the title page, and one of them's pressing a big red button. Of course, it's in character for Eggman to go, "It's never my fault," and punish them anyways because he has an ego problem. But why are they trying to get us to sympathize with them by making the screw up not in any way their fault? They're not going to be allowed to be sympathetic because they're not going to stay with the heroes. They're not going to stay neutral for a while like Scratch and Grounder did in Archie. Eggman was the one who put a button in his machine that would make the arms of the mecha fall off if it was pressed. Why would he ever do that? This is completely ridiculous. So right away, the whole premise of the story is forced. And it's pathetic, because there's so many different ways they could have screwed up that would have actually made sense. How about you look at AOSCH and see all the ways that Scratch and Grounder screwed up? Though I remember that a lot of the time it wasn't really their fault that Sonic was so overpowered, and there was nothing that they could have done about it. And Sonic really annoys me because when Westwood's naturally happy that the discarded limbs of the mecha are going to provide Gun with technology, Sonic acts like he's an idiot. Why? Using Eggman's technology against him is the smart, genre-savvy thing to do. Any military worth their salt would do that. And even if you're not going to use the technology, the materials alone should be taken away and used. Eggman returns to his egg carrier, which is hidden in a field just outside of Station Square, and he tells Deco and Boko that they ruined his plans for the last time. And only time as far as the comic is concerned. Well, second time. They failed to get money out of an ATM. The point is, this is yet another reason why the comic should have had its own separate continuity like I thought it would. To someone who's reading the comic while refusing to watch the anime because they're not ready just yet to listen to the 4Kids voice actors, Eggman doesn't seem that justified in what he's doing. These guys aren't Scratch and Grounder. They're not making a habit of failing in their traps against Sonic literally every episode, multiple times. Even in the anime itself, I know for a fact that the first 11 episodes, they barely even get to do anything at all. They don't have a chance to fail. I was consistently impressed by how smart they actually were. They constantly make suggestions that would have been smarter plans than what Eggman was doing. Also, how does a random mole hear what Eggman's saying in the egg carrier? Does it just have the thinnest metal walls ever? That's pathetic for an airship. It was Eggman's fault. And just to prove my point about how smart they really are, even one of the robots points out that the buttons weren't labeled. And another one points out that he shouldn't have made that button in the first place. Okay, them questioning him was the last straw, but he programmed them that way, and he was gonna get rid of them temporarily anyways. It would have made more sense if he ditched them because he's fed up with them constantly questioning him. After all, why would he put up with that? It was forced that he put up with it even once. But even then, you'd think he would just reprogram them to stop doing that and not waste robots by ditching them outright. and force himself to go through the time and effort making new ones. Eggman's being such an idiot here. And sure, he is that in the games, but that's not good. That's frustrating. There's a reason no one takes him seriously. One of the laziest forms of writing is handing a character the idiot ball just to force a story. I can't even remember the games doing that. Though Eggman tends to be an idiot because of how arrogant, stubborn, and hedonistic he is, this is going too far. He just reprogrammed them or scrapped them. He wouldn't ditch them, and for these reasons, they questioned him plenty of times before, so this is out of character. Instead of Eggman removing their ability to question him, he fires them, and he plans to build bigger, badder robots who will follow his orders. But these guys did. You just didn't make their orders clear. That's your fault! And he should have made robots like that regardless. What took him so long? I love the idea of them getting fired and trying to find their own way, but it was executed so poorly that I'm not even enjoying this. I promptly feel sorry for Bokkun when he's told that he might be replaced too if he misbehaves. I like that we see civilians naturally staring at these guys since they're robots. Lucky for them, they don't get all self-conscious about it, because they would be pretty sad and miserable. One of the robots, see, this is why their designs suck. I still don't remember which is which. Scratch was obviously Scratch because he's a chicken robot. Chickens scratch the ground. The Grounder moved along the ground on wheel things, except he could fly later for some reason. But he at least needed a helicopter blade to do that. These designs are memorable, but their names have nothing to do with anything, and they'd be better off just looking like badniks. They're so generic. It's sad because I think I have grown to like and respect them by this point, because they're surprisingly smart in this comic, and they're not nearly as incompetent as I'd expect. But their names are so stupid and forgettable. The gold robot says that he's been learning about human culture, and they're gonna do the right thing and get jobs to make money. Why would Eggman have given either of them a conscience? Why would he give them the free will to get that conscience? He never says that it's because he's too lazy to reprogram them to know what to do in the new situations he thrusts them into. Which he barely ever does thrust them into new situations. Instead of them relying on their free will to know what to do, which they couldn't with unlabeled buttons, they could have had no free will and been reprogrammed to know what to do just fine. Sadie and Robotnik would obviously never have this problem. Anyways, days later, Bokkun calls the robots on a cell phone and tells them that Eggman's singing and dancing while engineering, and he's never seen him like this before. Not even during the brief moments where he thought he'd beat Sonic. So, I guess Bokkun has a stolen cell phone, and the robots know his phone number by heart so they can call him up on the payphone. For this exact situation, where they'd be separated from him and need to call him. Doesn't the government know how to track down stolen phones? Won't the victim report the theft, and then the government can track the thief's calls and text messages and activate the GPS on the phone to locate it right away? The government should have found this phone by now. Or it should be going after it. Anyways, one of the robots asks if Eggman's sick, and the other says he's always wondered if he was, presumably because Eggman's evil. Why would he be programmed to be able to think that about his master? Sadie M and Archie and Underground Robotnik weren't this stupid. They were competent villains. Even the game's Eggman was smarter than this, unless Orba and Cuba have free will. They contradict him all the time, so I guess I can blame Pontac and Grab for the start of him being an idiot too. Before them, all of his robots had no free will. It was a big thing that Metal Sonic didn't. This makes no sense of someone who builds robots. Bokkun's pretty compassionate and caring about his brothers to take it upon himself to ask them how they're going in their new lives, when he doesn't even have to. That's impressive for a robot of Eggman's. You'd think that a robot would not care because, oh, they got fired, they deserve it. Scratch and Grounder owe a lot of their screw-ups to their poor dynamic together. They were constantly arguing and bickering over who Eggman loved most. But these robots are getting along just fine. So at least ex-Eggman was smart in that respect. He definitely made better robots than AOCH Robotnik did. Deco says that Boko and him start their new jobs today. What about the story can't be nitpicked to death? How did they get jobs so easily without any way of knowing how to make a resume or do a job interview correctly? And with no high school or college education, If anyone could just walk up to a random place and ask for a job, we wouldn't have unemployment rates. They're robots. Everyone would just reject them on sight. They would recognize them. It'd be nice if it was explained that their boss hired them so easily because, well, either he was lazy and wanted to skip out on the resume and job interview process, and maybe he thinks that because they're robots he can get away with that. Or maybe he hired them because the heroes pressured him into it, because how else are they going to redeem themselves? But we don't even get to see that. It's so lazy. It just doesn't make sense. If he refused to pay them, they just leave, so that's not his plan. I like that Eggman asked Bo-kun if he was ordering another dozen cheesecakes. But how does he expect people to bring the food he ordered to the egg carrier, or whatever base they're usually on? Also, wouldn't an airship be a pretty bad base because he'd have to constantly worry about refueling it to keep it in the air? That's why in the Mecha Sally arc, Eggman had to make a bunch of refueling stations, oil rigs, all to power the Death Egg. He'd be better off going back to his island base. Here, anyone can just look up or even hear the airship and they'll immediately look up. You'd think the government would have spotted it and shot it down with a whole bunch of missiles by this point. Then Eggman introduces more muscular versions of Deco and Boko, and Sonic's surprised to seeing Deco and Boko working in an ice cream sundae shop. But for the sake of forced comedy, the whole place is a mess, apparently, and the owner wants to fire them already. Why did it get that way? Why did we have to look at Eggman and Bo-kun instead of seeing the actual plot? That shouldn't have been off screen. These robots haven't given me the impression that they'd be that incompetent at literally everything they do ever. The only thing I can think of them doing in the anime, in Sonic F at least, aside from handing Eggman his robot choosing cards, was that they were busy watching TV and so the base got attacked too much. And again, that's Eggman's fault for letting them watch TV at their leisure. Sonic was nice enough to use his super speed to clean up the whole shop immediately. But unrealistically, there's no trace of ice cream on his gloves, and he wasn't using a bunch of napkins as far as we can tell. The owner decides way too easily that he overreacted, when the only reason the shop got cleaned up so easily was because Sonic happened to show up. Why bother having this kind of intriguing plot if these robots aren't allowed to stay that way, and we won't get to see them in any other jobs? At least Flynn and Scratchy Grounders stay waiters, even if his laziness meant he didn't bother showing us how they got to that point, or making a remotely big deal out of it. Scarlet reports on the government installation being under attack by Eggman again, and Sonic shows up to back up Westwood, who says to scramble the Beetle ships. Sonic assumes Eggman's come back for the arms and legs, and the limbs got located by flying new henchbots. They would have been better off dismantling them and using them for materials, but of course he would have attacked anyways. But if they're all completely intact as normal, then he could just steal them and just use them again. Sonic's happy to get a challenge. He says he's bored by their long words, and impressively, Sonic gets buried in rubble after an explosion happens, and he says these are the toughest robots he ever built, and they fly away just fine. How he doesn't have to go to the hospital after this is beyond me. This just made me think of the episode of AOSTH where Eggman made Grounder and Scratch more competent instead of firing them by making them smart robo-ninjas. So it just gives me a glimpse of how this plot could have actually made sense, because logically Eggman should have done this to Deco and Boko, not given up on them. Eggman congratulates his new henchmen, but I'm sure for the sake of a predictable twist, they'll betray him or something in a lazy excuse to immediately get things back to the status quo that isn't worth it anyways. They tell Eggman that if the Earth is to be conquered, he must be in prison so they will succeed. Why did he insist on giving them free will? That was his whole problem with the previous robots. Why didn't he just give the previous robots the ability to fly in better armor and that's it? I was hoping he had the good sense not to do that because they're talking like stereotypical robots. But instead laziness shows up, and I get proven right about my cynicism literally a line later. They pick him up, and Bo-kun runs away and they put him in a cage. If only this took Eggman down for good. But that would have required changing the status quo, and making Sonic X actually reach its full potential. Also, because forced comedy, for no reason the ice cream shop gets covered in ice cream again, and the robots get fired. and Sonic says that they're even faster than he is. This story sucks! This wouldn't happen! I don't buy that they're this incompetent and worthless. I saw all of Sonic F, and if they sucked that badly, I would have remembered it. Instead, I think mostly all they did was give Eggman cards and watch TV at some point. And more bad writing, the gold robot says that they work here and can't leave their jobs a panel after they were clearly fired. Their boss begs them to go back to Eggman, as I feel no respect for the story whatsoever. Why would anyone want these robots to go back to working for a tyrannical terrorist? Even Flynn didn't make Scratch and Grounder horrible waiters just to immediately justify them going back to Eggman. They were doing perfectly fine, though if this was by Flynn, I wouldn't be surprised. After a giant mecha gets created, Sonic shows up, and with a Deus Ex Machina ring right away because predictability, he punches the robot. The mecha goes off, and Sonic is told that they predicted he won't let Station Square get blown up, and while he saves the city, they'll complete their world-conquering mission. How? Are they gonna go to a United Nations meeting? How would they know where that is? The internet? There's no position of world dictator for them to grab in 2 seconds. And one of the biggest plot holes is made really obvious because one of the big robots says that they weren't programmed to laugh maniacally, so they won't. Well, they weren't programmed to turn on Eggman either, and that still happened. So this whole plot is forced as hell. They came off as having less free will, and they have more. Why didn't Deco and Boko turn on him then? I like that it's revealed one of the robot's usual talents is lockpicking with a bobby pin. Then after the robot sidekicks get chased, one of them slips and falls into a machine that creates an explosion for no reason at all. And Robotnik gets free of the cage he was in because lazy writing, when I don't see why that would free him. It looks like a normal metal cage. It should be unlocked with a key, not by a machine. This moment of competence only happened unintentionally, and that sucks. It's too late to try to imply that the only way that can be useful is by accident. Now! This feels like extreme flanderization to the absolute ridiculous degree. I buy this of Sadie M. Antoine, but not robots who constantly make better plans than Eggman does. Then Eggman grabs a remote and presses some buttons to effortlessly destroy the big robots who should have seen the remote already and done something with it. Ironically, since they don't know what it does, they would have had no choice but to press a button on it to learn what it does. Maybe this plot should have fallen apart sooner because they pressed the buttons on the remote out of curiosity. Instead, they were genre savvy enough to leave the remote alone just in case, but not genre savvy enough to just get rid of it entirely if they're making that paranoid assumptions. This issue sucks in literally every way imaginable because it can't even be cool with an action scene that lasts a decent amount of time. I don't remember the mecha lasting a proper amount of time in a fight scene, and this is too easy. Speaking of easy victories, Sonic uses a ring to jump into the mecha and send it straight for the egg carrier. This is an action series, isn't it? Eggman asks if someone really thinks he'd make robots smarter than he is. Again, that's totally unself-aware of the writing since Deco and Boko constantly contradict him and make suggestions for evil plans. And that's not funny. No one points out that he's actually supposed to be wrong. An explosion happens to cover the robots in soot, yet not Eggman. Huh? Why wasn't Eggman destroyed? Wouldn't the whole egg carrier have been destroyed? How did only they get blown up? This mecha was supposed to have a bomb that would destroy all of Station Square. So, at least there was tension. So at least it was high stakes. Eggman says that they have to get the egg carrier out of here before Sonic comes back, and they can find somewhere new to hide and make repairs. Repairs where? From what materials? This horrible story was by Joe Edkin. Well, at least it's not by Flynn for once, but that's actually pretty surprising to me. It was about the predictable plot that Boko and Deku are fired, only to come back to Eggman in the same issue, which is pathetically predictable and invalidates the whole story. It was an interesting idea, but it was just completely horribly executed. This is a comic book! Comic books are not meant to not have continuity. At that point, just do a TV show. At that point, this is just the anime, but lower budget. Comics are supposed to be better than anime because they have actual continuity. These guys are randomly shown to be so incompetent that they somehow cover the whole ice cream store with ice cream. This is something that needed to be shown in motion, because I have no idea how they could manage this by accident. To just arbitrarily force to suck at their job so their boss can want them to leave. That's pathetic of the writing, to be so painfully predictable. It was in character for the arrogant Eggman to fire the robots for stuff that's actually his fault, but considering that practically every other Robotnik in existence has avoided giving his robots free will, I can safely conclude that it's not in character for Eggman in general to have given robots the free will for this plot to happen. He has no reason to give these robots the ability to do stuff he doesn't want them to do, especially when their use is so limited. I can understand letting them think on their own so they can adapt to new situations without forcing him to manually reprogram them for everything, and making Sonic beat them too easy because they have predictable video gamey fighting patterns and can't adjust them in a fight, but they don't fight him. As Archie proved with Mecha Sally, they can have robots think on their own and still not be able to betray Eggman. Eggman had no reason to put his robot sidekicks in charge of a mecha without reprogramming them to know how the buttons work, or labeling them. Since when does he put them in charge of something like that? He should have been in charge of those buttons, but he wasn't to force the plot, when he always does stuff by himself. Why bother having a plot where the robots try to be good, which they shouldn't be programmed to be able to want to do, if that plot will just be a stupid episodic thing that makes no sense? What's the point of having a comic book if this episode could have been the anime, no problem, because there's no continuity? Even in this very issue, we see that these robots are the smartest of all the robot sidekicks so far, because they constantly show the ability to point out that he screwed up and make better plans than he does. And then I'm expected to believe it when they're flanderized into being so incompetent that the epic fail of something basic and simple. How'd they even get jobs without a resume? So how did the robots not just press the button and blow themselves up, or destroy the remote if they're suspicious of it? Nothing works. This is one of the worst stories in the comic by far. It's an idiot plot that makes the bad guys morons so it'll happen. And it's nothing but wasted potential.